My name is Chloe. I'm standing in a park near Green Lake, the same place where my brother and I used to play as kids. It's a cold, gray Seattle day, and the lake looks like sheet metal. My brother, Ryan, is here too, looking smaller and defeated. A month ago, I received an email from my former boss, Diane. Halcyon had completed an internal review and updated my separation file to show that my termination was due to malicious impersonation. This meant that future employers wouldn't see me as having a reputational issue. It was a huge relief, but it also brought back a flood of memories. My family has always been a complicated mess. My parents, Tom and Linda, are a typical middle-class couple living in Seattle. Dad is a mechanic, and Mom works part-time at a local store. They've always had a laid-back attitude, but when it comes to Ryan, they turn a blind eye to his behavior. Ryan has always been jealous of me. I'm the responsible one, the one who pays the bills and takes care of the family. I work in the medical supply industry, handling contracts and audits for a company called Health Tech Solutions. I was on the verge of a big promotion, a national one that would have been a huge step in my career. It all started on my 32nd birthday. I was at my parents' backyard, holding a slice of my birthday cake, when Ryan, who was drunk, lifted his beer and winked at his friends. He said, "Watch this. Let's see how perfect Chloe sounds when she finally says what she really thinks." At first, I thought he was just being his usual annoying self. But then I heard my supervisor's voicemail greeting through his phone. My blood ran cold. Before I could stop him, he pitched his voice higher and left a message pretending to be me. He slurred words, mocked a major hospital client, and said our company could swap expired inventory without the clients noticing. Everyone around him laughed. Mom covered her mouth and smiled, and Dad just muttered, "He's just having fun." I lunged for the phone, but Ryan stepped back, still recording and treating my life like a party trick. By the time I got the phone from him, the voicemail had already been sent. That night, when I got home, I had 3 missed calls from Diane and an urgent email. I called her back from my car. Her voice was cold and angry. She played the voicemail for me, and hearing Ryan's fake version of my voice made my skin crawl. He had exaggerated my tone to make me sound drunk, reckless, and offensive. It sounded like an admission of fraud and contempt for a major client. I told Diane the truth as fast as I could. I said it was Ryan, that I'd been trying to stop him, and I even offered to send evidence. But I could tell she was skeptical. The next morning, I was called into an emergency meeting with Diane, an HR director, and a legal representative. They had a transcript of the voicemail as if it were evidence in a trial. I explained everything again. I told them Ryan had always resented my success at work and my financial support for the family. Dad had a back injury a few years ago, and Mom had some cash flow problems, so I'd been covering more and more expenses. Ryan thought my work was boring and unimportant. The legal representative asked if I could prove it wasn't me. I had no recording of him grabbing the phone, no security footage. All I had was my word against a voicemail that sounded so much like me. Diane then said, "Given the client escalation and the reputational risk, we are terminating your employment effective immediately." I was devastated. As I was walking to my car in the rain, Ryan called. He asked if corporate survived his comedy set. I told him he got me fired. He first laughed, then panicked and said he'd talk to them. But it was too late. My parents didn't seem to understand the gravity of the situation. Mom called to tell me to calm down, saying it was just an embarrassing misunderstanding. Dad said the company should have asked more questions. The first week after I got fired was a nightmare. I was in a state of shock. I slept at 4 o'clock in the morning, had coffee at noon, and left dishes in the sink. Unopened emails piled up, and every subject line felt like an accusation. But my best friend, Lily, refused to let me wallow in self-pity. She came over with takeout and told me, "Chloe, when everything falls apart, you get to choose one thing. Lie there or get up meaner." Her words stuck with me. I decided to take action. I rebuilt my resume, focusing on my achievements. I created a spreadsheet of job applications, recruiter names, and follow-up dates. I contacted former clients and asked them to speak to my integrity. One Thursday, a recruiter from Summit Health Network called. They were expanding their vendor integrity division and needed someone with my skills. The title was Director of Vendor Integrity, a position bigger than anything I'd ever held. The interview process was tough. I had a screening call, a case presentation, a scenario panel, and a final meeting with the COO, Emily. She asked me a tough question. Imagine a client receives a message that appears to come from one of your analysts admitting misconduct. Walk me through your first 24 hours. I answered with all my experience. I talked about verification, source authentication, client containment, independent review, internal exposure mapping, and making zero assumptions until there was evidence. Emily said my answer came from experience, and I told her it did. I got the offer. It was more money, more authority, and more visibility. But as soon as my family found out, they started acting up again. Mom called to invite me for a family dinner to celebrate, and then Ryan texted asking for help with rent. When I started at Summit Health Network, I had a great first week. I had an office with glass walls, a great team, and a busy schedule. But then my parents and Ryan showed up at my apartment. They came in, acting all fake warm at first. Mom said they always knew I'd bounce back, Dad said setbacks build character, and Ryan claimed he told everyone I was too smart to stay down. Then Dad brought up the family budget. Mom explained that their costs were rising, Dad's physical therapy wasn't fully covered, and Ryan had a temporary shortfall. They assumed I'd resume helping them as I had before. I was furious. I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder I'd been building for weeks. It had all the transfer logs, utility screenshots, and Ryan's unpaid loans. I told them they didn't need me, they needed access. I also informed them that I'd transferred all the shared expenses out of my name. I sent them certified letters that morning. To Mom and Dad, it was an accounting of what I'd paid and a notice ending all voluntary support. To Ryan, it was a civil demand letter for repayment and a notice preserving evidence of his prank call. They were shocked. Ryan tried to act tough at first, but then he started to panic. Mom called me cruel, Dad called me ungrateful, and Ryan left voicemails switching from fury to panic. A few days later, Ryan tried to get back at me. He called Summit Health Network pretending to be a concerned community member, warning them that I was unstable and vindictive. But he picked the wrong company. The call was logged, and the security lead sent the recording to me. I took the recording to Emily and told her the whole story. She asked if I could document it, and I showed her the folder. She said, "Good. Then he doesn't control the story here." She authorized building level restrictions on Ryan. Ryan showed up at the company anyway. He started shouting at me in the parking lot, saying I was destroying my own brother. I told him he'd done more to destroy me than any enemy could. Security escorted him off the property. The next morning, I found out that Ryan had applied for a municipal contract subcontracting role. But his actions had created a paper trail of harassment, and he was blacklisted. Dad texted me, asking what he'd done. I sent him a screenshot of Ryan's smear call. Dad later said Mom hadn't told him about it. Diane called me and said Matthew's procurement director had been contacted by a man trying to clarify the misunderstanding about me. This man's actions had deepened their suspicion that the original voicemail was a malicious impersonation. Diane said they should have investigated harder and would put it in writing for my case. Ryan finally requested a formal mediation through his attorney. At the mediation, his attorney tried to minimize everything, but my attorney laid out the whole timeline. When it was Ryan's turn to speak, he said, "I didn't think she'd fight back like this." The mediation ended with a structured repayment agreement and a no-contact provision. My mother tried to stop me in the hallway, asking me not to erase them completely. I told her they'd erased me first, and I'd just finally noticed. Now, standing here in the park with Ryan, he says, Dad says I should say I'm sorry properly. I almost turn around. When he finally says, I'm sorry, it's too little, too late. I ask him why he did it, and he admits he was sick of hearing about me, sick of Mom praising me and Dad calling me reliable. I tell him he was angry because my stability made him feel defective. He says everything went wrong after the letters, that Mom blamed him, Dad stopped covering for him, and clients backed off. I tell him he burned down his own life because he tried to control mine. I leave him there, knowing that the story is truly over. I've finally broken free from the toxic cycle of my family. I've gained a life that doesn't depend on their approval. And when people at Summit Health Network ask if I'm close with my family, I simply say, not anymore.